Hello, everyone.
Hi,
Welcome.
everybody.
I'm Betsy Coe, and I have with me here David Randall, your tour guide to one of WikiTree's most exciting uh, global projects. And this is the 15 nation tour, where in honor and celebration of WikiTree's 15th birthday this year, we're taking 3 weeks at a time to visit 15 countries and to have a group of notables from that country and then research them and connect them to the tree and add as many profiles as possible during the 3 week period. So the team has just wrapped up Cameroon this week, the ninth stop.
To say we
And
just were commenting, we're about to hit our tenth nation, which is pretty amazing. That
yes, yeah.
we weren't sure how successful this project's going to be, but we've been moving ahead steadily, and it's been a really amazing trip.
Yeah, that's great. And it's set to you've timed it out to wrap up around WikiTree Day, right? So early November.
We our 15th nation will wrap up um, right around WikiTree Day. I don't know if it's the exact day, but it'll be
Yeah,
approximately that
yeah,
weekend.
yeah.
And we'll have some special announcements coming up at that time as to what we're going to do
Hmm.
once the 50 Nations tour is over.
Hmm.
We've been playing with a bunch of ideas, but I think we've got some pretty neat stuff coming up for the future,
Yeah.
and we'll tie that announcement into WikiTree Day, which is November. I don't recall the exact date, but
Whatever the first weekend in November is.
yeah,
Um, so
and
um,
that'll have us wrapped up before the holidays, so we can take a little break and um, visit with our families before we head off on our next adventure.
fantastic. Well, I'm really curious to see what you've uncovered in Cameroon. It
Okay.
seems just based. I don't know a lot about Cameroon, but I seems like there would be some um, ties to Germany and France and England, just based on the
Hmm.
colonial history of the country.
Yeah. So you probably just in that little sentence there probably know more than most people do about Cameroon, at least from my part of the world. I
Mm.
suppose if you lived near Cameroon, you might know something about it. But one of the things in at least from my personal experience growing up in the United States, we learn about Africa, but we don't learn about so much about the individual nations, and not just with Africa, but with Asia, with Latin America. We kind of learn about the regions a little bit, but it's really been amazing to me learning about the individual countries from their perspective, their history from their perspective, not from the American perspective or Western European perspective. And when we've hit, we're now up to enough countries that we're returning to continents that we've already been to, and we did Kenya previously, but Kenya and Cameroon, although they're both in Africa, are quite far apart from each other and have very different histories.
Mhm.
And learning about those individual um, historical accounts has really been intriguing to me. Um, and for Cameroon, our audience tends to be a mixture of people who have been on the tour with us from the beginning and are very involved, and people who are tuning in for the first time and really don't know anything about what we do and the origins of this project. So for those people, I want to go back and just kind of talk about what we're all about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The purpose of the 15 Nations tour, it's an experimental project. And it was created based on the recommendation of a member who posted a comment on G2G. And she had asked about, I won't get into all the specifics of it, but basically she had suggested creating some sort of global project. And we went with that. We developed the 15 Nations tour with the objective of trying to get the profiles of countries that are underrepresented, increasing the profiles of countries that are underrepresented, not only on WikiTree, but I think in genealogy in general.
Mhm.
Many of these countries, such as Cameroon, if you go over to Ancestry or find Family Search, you're not going to find much in terms of Cameroonian records, even on those sites. So
Mhm.
that was our challenge. Is we picked 15 nations. We bounce around all over the world. Coincidentally, the United Nations divides the world into 15 regions. So I've picked one country from each region so that we make sure we're kind of well balanced.
Mhm.
And we start out. I picked 15 notables. I often don't know anything about these. For example, again with Cameroon, if you asked me to name 15 famous Cameroonians, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So
Me
what
neither.
do? I Google famous Cameroonians.
Mhm.
Over time, I've found some websites that are pretty good at listing famous people from around the world, and I look for interesting ones and just kind of use my gut and pick 15 that I think will be interesting. But I don't know anything about these people when we start. So I
Mhm.
often know nothing about the country. I certainly don't know anything about doing genealogical research in the country. And I won't say always, but probably two-thirds of the notables that we pick, I don't know anything about other than what I've learned in picking them. So it's really a blank slate. I put them up there and I ask the members to do what they can. And we've got a really amazing team, about a half dozen people I think that have been with us, if not from the very beginning, at least for several countries. Um, and the things that they're able to accomplish is just really been remarkable. We, as I said, we often can't go to Ancestry or Find a Grave, Family Search, all the ones that we normally would look at for our American or Western European ancestors. They don't work for this project
Mhm.
typically, at least not in the beginning. What we wind up doing is going more to newspaper sites, um, just starting with Google and putting the person's name in with, obituary or parents, something like that, and see what we can get.
Mhm.
Um, and then what winds up happening, you take a country like Cameroon, where we have almost no Cameroonian profiles. In order to make a connection, we're not going to connect to Cameroon. What we need to do is find somebody that left Cameroon and went to the West, went to a country where we can do, more traditional Western type genealogy. That's how we connect most of them. Um, Even, for example, Cameroon and Kenya and a few others have had kings, nobility. Malaysia had royalty.
Mhm.
The royalty just keeps going back further and further in, say, Malaysia, and we never make the connection, no matter how far back we go, because the profiles just aren't on WikiTree.
Right.
So if we can get them connected through somebody that traveled to the United States, traveled to South America, Argentina, we learned is the second biggest recipient of um, immigrants.
Mhm.
99% of Argentinians have ancestry from outside of Argentina. So that made that country actually much easier than others to do research in. So
Mhm.
that's what that's kind of what our process is. Also looking for biographies. One of the cool things is Amazon usually has, when you have a book on Amazon, they often give you a preview of the first chapter.
Mhm.
And when you're reading a biography, the first chapter is where they tell you where they were born and who their parents were. And, we don't need all the other chapters, but you can get that
Sure.
first chapter for free. And, we've found quite a bit that way. So those are just some of the tools we use. But that's the whole goal is when we take a country like Cameroon,
Mhm.
what are we going to do now? How are we going to figure this out? And that's the challenge. It's kind of like working on a crossword puzzle or something like that, where you're presented with the problem, and now you got to figure out how you're going to solve it.
Mhm.
But we're learning some similarities as we go from country to country, and again, we're learning the differences in record keeping, etc. India, for example, we learned that most of India's records are in London because it was a British colony for so long that the research that we were doing wasn't in India; it was in the London archives, which
Mhm.
work to our advantage because that's rather accessible.
Right.
Um, the Cameroon, for people that don't know, and Betsy alluded to this, that they were originally, um, when they were first colonized, they were originally colonized by the Germans. From there, they were, after Germany fell during World War One, the nation was split between France and England, and you had British Cameroon and French Cameroon, and then eventually Cameroon gained its independence, and the two colonies merged into a single nation. Um, they have been around. Let me see if I can pull the date up here real quickly. Um, Cameroon became a country in 1960, and since then they have had two presidents.
Mm.
The current president has been in office since, I believe, 1981, if I recall. He is 90 something years old. He is the longest and
Wow,
oldest world leader in the world. But he's been in power for quite a while.
that's amazing.
Um, yeah. One of the things that we've found with almost every single nation, I try hard to keep from using living people because we have access issues for privacy reasons. On Cameroon, I couldn't do that because I just couldn't come up with enough deceased famous people. Part of that reason is, unless I want to go with all political leaders, um, going back to say the 1800s, when deceased in early 1900s, when you're going to find your deceased celebrities, they didn't have, for the most part, movie stars, sports heroes, those kinds of pop culture type celebrities.
Mhm.
So we wound up going with a few living people, a few more this time than typical. But I always do include the current heads of state and head of government if there's both. And interestingly, one of the things, and we've talked about this before, it is really difficult to find any information on the families of foreign leaders. They don't publicize that like we do here in the West. In the United States, we know everything about Joe Biden's family and Donald Trump's family. Um, we even know about their pets and all of that. But you go to um, almost every nation that we've dealt with, beyond maybe their wife, possibly their parents. You just don't get that kind of information.
Mm.
And I've used as an example in the past Vladimir Putin, who's probably one of the most famous world leaders there is. I don't know about his parents and his family and his,
Mhm.
that's all secretive. They do that, a lot of them on purpose. They, the more public information there is about them, the less um, the allure of their power um,
Mhm.
can be diminished. They don't want to appear too human, too normal, or they lose that clout. So,
Mm.
and that also though applies for a lot of the celebrities, particularly in a poorer nation like Cameroon, where the parents and ancestors were peasant farmers, let's say. You're not going to have a lot of record keeping and that, so it becomes difficult um, you know, to trace that information. But if we could take a look, I want to review a couple. Well, let me just tell you, for Cameroon, we made three connections, which is on the low side, but that's
Mm.
still something. And we created 139 new profiles. So that's 139 more than we had
Yeah.
3 weeks ago. So that's a good deal. Um,
Is there
and I also
is there
say,
a Cameroon
go ahead.
sticker? Is there a
Or,
Cameroon sticker that will or
you know what? We have a sticker for every country we've done.
Mhm.
And I did not realize until about 2 days ago that I never requested the Cameroon sticker. So we will get a Cameroon sticker and get
Okay.
that up. But I thought we had it, and apparently we don't. So we'll get that up there. But every other country, yes, we do have and it's a born in sticker, um, not a came from sticker, I guess. We have some that says they have German roots or French roots.
Mhm.
These actually say was born in Cameroon, so we apply
Mhm.
it to anybody that was born, in that country.
Mhm.
Um, So we'll scroll down on the screen here a little bit and we'll click on the first individual.
Okay.
So I'll just
Wonderful,
talk about a couple.
wonderful background here on this page for anyone who wants to educate themselves, like I would. Go
Mhm.
back and read this.
Yeah, I try to I post the history and the demographics, and what I'm trying to do there is focus on information that the team needs going in. What ethnic groups are we dealing with? What religions are we dealing with?
Mhm.
I've got limited space, so I don't go into the whole history, but enough that when we're reading a biography or something, it gives us a little bit of framework
Yeah.
to go on. So this individual here, this is Rudolph Manga Bell. The Bell family was a line of uh, chieftains, chiefs from um, a tribe in Cameroon called the Douala tribe. They're one of the biggest tribes um, in the region that is now Cameroon. The tribe itself goes back, many eons before Western Europeans came in and colonized and created Cameroon.
Mm,
Um, but he was a chieftain at the time of the German occupation or the colonization, I should probably say.
mhm,
His father was actually the chieftain when the Germans came in, and initially they had good relations. The Douala people live on the coast, and
mhm,
they made their living basically as traders. They would go inland and collect goods from the inland peoples, bring them to the coast, and trade with various countries that had um, seafaring countries, let's call them, but the Germans included.
mhm,
And the Bell family, who was one of two rival groups that led the Douala, they actually became quite wealthy. When the Germans came in, they were initially very fond of the Germans and vice versa.
mm,
Um, the um, Rudolph's father was able to send Rudolph to Germany for an education,
mhm,
and all was really well until until Rudolph became king and decided he did not like the way the Germans were treating the um, the Douala people, taking advantage of them. So
mhm,
he protested and eventually started stirring up some uh, near revolutionary um, sentiment among his people,
mhm.
and the Germans dealt with it by executing him. And that was the end of that line. So he is considered a martyr and a hero um, in Cameroon. But it's a sad story. He was 40 years old approximately when he was
Oh,
executed. Um, we were able to trace him because his wife was the
uh-huh,
daughter of a English trader.
ah,
And
uh-huh,
so her mother was Cameroonian, but her father, or she was a Douala, but her father was English, and so we were able to trace his family pretty easily. And that's what I was saying earlier, is that that's the key, is if we can find somebody. Yeah, and there's a
yeah.
very nice picture of him and his wife. Um, but once we make that Western connection,
Mhm,
we then we use our traditional skills. But ideally, the more Cameroonian profiles we get up there,
mhm.
somebody else is going to come on down the line and be able to connect their family directly through Cameroonian records and not have to find a Western connection.
Right, right.
That would be our
Yeah.
goal.
I mean, I'm just looking at the date that he died. I mean, he came so close to the transition, like when Germany was out of power, you know.
Hmm. Yeah,
It
and
was
he was very much a Western. He went to German schools. He
mhm,
styled himself as king rather than chieftain
mhm,
or whatever, that I don't know what term he would have used in his language, but he saw himself as a Western style
mhm,
king,
mhm,
very wealthy. They also, as trade diminished, his family took over the cocoa industry.
Mhm.
and basically they were the sole financial recipients to all of the cocoa trade in that area. So that was another way that they made a lot of money. But
Yeah.
the money didn't help when the Germans decided they didn't like him. They
Mhm.
got rid of him and put another family in charge.
Yeah.
All right. So if we want to go to the next one,
Louis
the next
Louis Brody.
Lewis Brody. So
Okay.
this one fascinated me because Lewis Brody is also a member of the Dualit tribe, and he became, contrary to what I was saying earlier about not having pop stars, he became a movie star in the 1920s.
Wow.
I'm not quite sure how he got into the industry, but he was a very popular German movie star.
Mhm.
He did a lot of action type films. He was apparently a very large man and was kind of as I said, kind of an action hero. He
Mm,
made over 40 films, starting in the 20s, going all the way. He remained active throughout the Nazi era,
mm.
and all the way into the 1950s. And let me make sure I've got the notes here correct. Oh, and he was in Alfred Hitchcock's very first film, which was called The
Really?
Pleasure Garden. I've
Huh.
never seen it. It was made in 1925. I
Okay.
don't typically watch movies that are quite that early, so I've missed that one.
Right.
Um, but again, I'm not quite sure how he went from living in a village in Cameroon in the 1920s to being in an Alfred Hitchcock film, but somehow he managed to do that. Um, and his connection was, I believe Darren did a lot of work on his profile
And I think
and
Darren
making
is
the connection.
Darren's in the chat, I think.
I believe he is.
Yes. Yes.
Y-
Giving you
And
a hard time for not getting a
I
sticker.
did a I did a quick connection to me search to
Uh-huh.
see, where the line went,
Right.
and he was Darren created 14 profiles between Lewis Brody and myself. That's a lot of links that he had to create in order to find a not to myself, but to the family that connected to me.
Yeah.
So he had 40 or not 40, 14 individuals that
Mhm.
he created. I don't know how many on top of that he created before he found that link,
Mhm.
but he linked them to the Hungerford family of the United States, which I am descended from the Hungerford family. So there was my connection.
Awesome.
And he married Lewis Brody married a woman who was also half German.
Uh-huh.
And so Darren researched the German ancestry,
Mhm.
and that led to some American connections. And from those American connections, he connected to my family. So that was cool.
Excellent work.
Um, Yeah, it's a lot of work,
Yeah.
but one of the things that I also mentioned to new people, if you're intimidated because you think I can't do Cameroonian research, well, again, I mentioned none of us know what we're doing, so that shouldn't
Mhm.
be a hindrance for you. And we often find very quickly, with one or two generations, we're back in the United States, or we're in France or Germany or England or some other country.
Mhm.
So, our research is not primarily in necessarily the country that we're researching.
Right.
Um, and one of the things we also find when we are researching is we may find, say, an obituary that lists several relatives, or even I said with the royalty, we may be able to trace it back 10, 20 generations, but it's just a bunch of names. There's no documentation. We might have dates, we might not. So that doesn't do us so much good. But if we can make that Western connection, then,
Mhm.
um, I find myself when we were doing Malaysia, did one of the kings of a Malaysian tribe. He was born in 1850,
Mhm.
and next thing you know, I'm in Kansas looking at census records. It's like how he got there, I don't know, but um, but that's what you don't expect that, but that's
Yeah,
really,
yeah,
where we get our successes from.
yeah.
And then let me go to one more. There's one more that we connected, and this one was kind of intriguing for me. If we go all the way down to the bottom of the
Okay,
list, and she's about second or third from the right there. The second from the bottom is Andy. I think she says it's Aloe.
okay,
She's a she's
okay.
a
That could be. That's
I don't
cool.
know if who recognizes her, but she is a actress here in Hollywood. If you scroll down just a little bit so I can see her biography, I want to get the
Yeah.
names of the shows she's in. Um, right there. So she was in. She played Serenity in the movie Pitch Perfect 3. She
Mhm.
played Lieutenant Wendy Seeger on Chicago Fire, and she now plays or recently played Nyora on Amazon's show Upload. I don't know any of those shows, or I haven't seen any of those shows, so I don't recognize her. But this was interesting because I did a little research on her.
Yeah,
Now, living people are difficult, not
yeah.
only because their profiles are private, because we can get around that, but their records are often publicly private. The birth certificates, census records. If you're born in 1980, we're not going to be able to find those kinds of records, and your parents may very well still be alive, and their records may still be private. So,
Mm,
doing that initial research can be a challenge. But her father came over from Cameroon to the United States to attend school. He was an ecologist, and he happened to go to um, my alma mater. He
mm,
went to Humboldt State University, which is a
mm,
fairly small school in California, and so that was cool right away. And then after he left school, he moved to my hometown in Texas.
mm.
So he was a neighbor of mine for quite a while. He doesn't live here anymore, but that was kind of like a double coincidence there.
Question.
Um,
So is Andy well, gender question, because it says in the bio actress, but then
mhm. Does
male,
she have it listed as male?
and then yeah.
Yeah, so we got to correct that. That's just an
But
oversight somebody
okay.
didn't
I
catch. Yeah,
mean,
so she
and
is.
the
No,
first,
Andy is female,
yeah, okay, okay.
but that a good catch there. We'll go in and we'll fix that. Um, I told I told you I don't know these people when I put them up, so maybe I thought she was male when I created the profile. It could very well have been me. But but anyway, that was kind of interesting to have him so close to home.
Mhm,
He was very active in Kenyan, I'm not sorry, Kenyan, Cameroonian um, conservation,
mhm,
um, and he's had some government positions, etc. Her mother is American,
mhm.
which again I didn't know when I chose her, but because her mother was American, one of our members was able to trace her family and get her connected.
Yeah,
So, so anyway, those are our three connections for this time.
excellent.
Um, the others were, we weren't quite as successful, but one of the things that I mention to our members quite often is, in some ways, even our failures are successes in the sense that the overriding objective of this project, in addition to getting profiles up onto WikiTree,
Mhm,
is to figure out what we know and what we don't know about these different countries and how we can increase future access. So
mhm,
when we hit a bunch of roadblocks, it's not as exciting as when we get our successes, our
mhm,
traditional successes. But discovering what those roadblocks are is really helpful to us in
mhm,
terms of figuring out where we need to go in the future.
mhm,
If we're going to bring African um, community members in from Africa, what is it we're going to have to do to make it this make WikiTree accessible to them?
mhm,
And so when we realize that we can't use traditional our traditional methods, do we just ignore those countries, or do we figure something out? And I think WikiTree is really masterful at figuring something out. So
Mhm.
that's our next step: is what are we going to figure, or how? What are
Mhm.
we going to figure out to bring these people from around the world in? And
Yeah.
I think that's very exciting.
And the addition
And
of all these profiles, the
mhm.
139 Cameroonian profiles, I mean, that's the first essential step.
I think you're right, because if I'm from Cameroon and I go onto WikiTree and I see
Mhm.
no mention of Cameroon anywhere,
Right.
I'm not going to stick around.
Right.
Um, but to see that we have an actual page up,
Mhm.
and we have resources, and the resources are there. They're just hard to find. We only give ourselves 3 weeks. Although I mentioned, as a reminder, that we leave these pages up permanently.
Mhm.
So even though we're done with Cameroon officially as our tour, part of our tour, you can always go back and work on these profiles. We don't close the websites, and we've had members do that, go back, and just recently one of our members went back and connected a bunch of Indian profiles that was from our first week.
Mhm.
And what were roadblocks 6 7 months ago weren't quite the roadblocks they were. We've gained skills in that time,
Yeah.
and he was able to go back and use some of those skills to connect people that we couldn't connect
Mhm.
7 months ago.
Yeah.
Which again, that's the goal of this, is to figure out how we can make this easier. And there are sources. There are, most countries have archives. They have national libraries. They have newspapers that are online. It's
Mhm.
just a matter of finding them.
Mhm.
Um, Cameroon has newspapers online with archives. They're not on newspapers.com. They're not on the regular sites we go to, but with enough digging, you can find them. And they're actually it's real easy to translate them into English, but a lot of them have English versions of their
Mhm.
newspapers.
Mhm.
So, so there are resources out there. It's just a matter of finding them.
Yeah.
So we're about halfway through our session here.
Yeah.
So it's time to announce our next country.
Okay.
So for our next country, we're going to, before you click on it,
Huh?
we are going to head back to Europe.
Okay.
We've been to Europe once before.
Would you
We
like a
went to,
drum roll, David?
well, give me just a minute here.
Okay.
Let me give you a little explanation here as to where we're going. And um, we went to Ukraine previously, and Ukraine was probably one of the most difficult nations we've had to deal with. A little bit because of the war, but not so much that, as much as the fact that it was a Soviet nation. Records were quite secretive. There were a number of things that made it difficult. Um, and we talk about how, bringing doing research in the West is much easier, et cetera. But I have a feeling this next country isn't going to be much easier than Ukraine. So anybody that's feeling a sense of relief that we're going to be doing a European country, we may not find this to be as easy as many other countries are. If you want to do your drum roll, if you want to pull the page up, we're
Okay. Ta-da!
we are going to Estonia. Estonia, for those who don't know, is a Balkan state. It is up the northern region, almost up towards it'd be up there towards Finland,
Mhm.
but also borders with Russia. Latvia and Lithuania are close neighbors there. Um, Estonia has an interesting history. And this is an example of where, we might on the surface think, well, this is also a former Soviet satellite nation. So it would be a lot like Ukraine. And there
Mhm.
will be some similarities, but their history is very different than Ukraine. And they have a much stronger sense, I think, of independence, where Ukraine, I think, um, kind of bought into the Soviet. Many people during the Soviet era, Ukrainians saw themselves as Soviet and became very prominent in the Soviet Union. I get the feeling from what I've read that the Estonians kept a much stronger sense of independent identity,
Hmm.
even through the Soviet era. Um, the Estonian history goes way back, but they were, moving into recent times, which is when our research is going to be occurring.
Hmm.
They had, they were part of the I mean, the Russian Empire.
Hmm.
Um, the they were then part of the Soviet Union, and it's only since the Soviet Union fell that they were actually an independent nation. Um, that's very similar to the Ukraine. So figuring out who's Estonian versus who's Soviet versus who's Russian is a little bit of a challenge. But again, it wasn't quite the challenge that it was with Ukraine,
Mm.
where it seems like people that were from Estonia, despite who may have been overseeing the country, thought of themselves as Estonian. So it made it a little bit easier to pick the 15 notables here.
And I noticed when I
Um,
was
mhm,
scrolling that there's also a Roma population in Estonia.
yes.
Small, but
Um,
yeah.
and in fact, if you scroll just a little bit further up
Mm.
to the beginning of that paragraph,
Hmm.
I think, did I put it in here? Um, so one of the things that we're going to be finding here, it it says between prior to World War II, 88% of the population was Estonian.
Hmm.
So that's getting, all the way into the Soviet Union era. Today, it's only about 61%.
Hmm.
So it's not quite 30% drop, but that's a huge drop in,
A big shift.
not a too long, not too many years. A lot of people fled Estonia during the Russian Empire era, during the Soviet era. They lost a lot of their native Estonian population. But this number went down not only because they lost population, but also because they have a lot of immigration into the nation. So Soviets or Russians, Ukrainians, Belarusians that have moved in.
Mm.
Um, a lot of that was coordinated by the government, um, moving people around deliberately. So what we're going to find with this group is a lot of um, the notables that I've selected
Hmm.
were born and lived for quite a while in Estonia,
Can
but
I
many
put
of them
those there?
actually left. Yeah, to
Shall.
go down
Hmm.
to the notables. Many of them actually left Estonia and went elsewhere. I don't know if they created families elsewhere. If they did, that'll be to our advantage. But many of them died in countries other than Estonia.
Hmm.
Um, I'm just going to go down briefly. I try hard not to do too much research on these people because I don't want it to influence, um, my selections. I want people to be. I don't want to steer it in one direction or the other and make too many assumptions before
Hmm.
we get it up. So I'm just going to go down briefly on these people and tell you who they are. Um, but there'll be a whole lot more in terms of discovering their bios when we get into it. Admiral Fabian Gottlieb von Bellingshausen. He was a cartographer and an explorer. He actually led. Well, he was on the first Russian expedition that circumnavigated the Earth, and he was the lead of the expedition that discovered Antarctica. So let me also throw this little tidbit in.
Hmm.
Um, when I One of the things that I look for when I'm looking to see who's really famous and who's not, and I go to Wikipedia, I look for the number of languages their biographies are in.
Yes.
Um, I just some people know that I just created a baseball project,
Hmm.
and a lot of people like Mickey Mantle and Ted Williams and some of these names that are household names in the United States, they had anywhere from 15 to maybe 20 languages. the majority of the people that I've chosen here for Estonia have 30 to 50 languages. So
Mhm.
these are people that are very well known worldwide,
Mhm.
even if I've never heard of them. So that was quite interesting to me as I was looking them up to see the massive number of languages that they're. Um, and I think most of them, if you're in that field, as you'll see, you're going to know who they are. And people may know many of these names that I don't know,
Mhm.
but they're in fields that I'm not well versed in.
Mhm.
For example, Carl Eros von Baer, father of embryology. He discovered, well, I won't say what he discovered, but he worked in um, basically how mammals reproduce and the field of embryology, studying embryos. He's the father of embryology. Now, I don't know anything about embryology, so I wouldn't have been able to tell you who the father of embryology was.
Yeah.
But I suppose if you've studied embryology, you may be very familiar with him.
Right.
Um, Frederick Reinhold Kreutzwald. He is a very well-known Estonian author. He's considered to have written, what did they call it? I'm drawing a blank, but kind of the father of modern Estonian literature. He wrote some very important works in the 1800s, and again is very well known in literary field.
Mhm.
Uh, Carl Lenz. He was kind of interesting. Again, I didn't read a whole lot on, but he's electrophysicist. He studied electricity, but if you'll notice his dates, he lived from 1804 to 1865. Um, so this was,
Yeah.
very early research into
Mhm.
electrophysics. Um, Again, not my field, so I didn't. I read the Wikipedia entry and explained very detailed what he actually accomplished, and I didn't understand any of it. So, but somebody that knows about that stuff is going to
Yeah.
say, "Oh yeah, of course." He has a couple um, laws, I guess they call them laws of physics that have named after him. He also has a meteor. No, that was he the one with the meteor? One of them had a meteor named after him.
Hmm.
Konstantin Pats, I believe it's pronounced Pats, first president of Estonia. So when Estonia um, gained independence from Russia, he was the first president, but he was a political powerhouse for about 40 years. So he's probably the most important Estonian,
Mhm.
historically speaking, politician. Um, A.H., and I don't know how to pronounce this, but Tamser is how I will say it. Again, another important writer. Um, don't know anything about his works, but if you Google famous Estonians, his name comes up every time. So um, Marie Under. She was a famous poet. I always try to get some women in here. It's
Mhm.
not always easy with some countries because
Yeah.
women have historically not been given the credit that or had the positions to become quote notable.
Mhm.
But Marie Under was a famous poet. She, I believe, died in Sweden, so we've got some research to do up there.
Mhm.
Um, Wolfgang Kohler, if you know anything about psychology, Gestalt theory, he was one of the founders of that theory. There were three men that kind of co-created that, um, which basically says that, oh, I'm going to forget the exact quote, but um, the sum of the parts does not necessarily equal the whole, meaning um, if you have all the parts necessary to build a bookcase, it doesn't give you a
Mhm.
bookcase, it just gives you a bunch of parts for the bookcase. Um, so
I,
the
I,
parts do not necessarily equal the whole.
I love how you've drawn in notables who like have a connection to a truism thing
Mhm.
like that, and because you had Murphy's
Yeah,
law, the
we
first.
did have Murphy before Murphy's
Yeah.
Law. Yeah. Yeah, and say that's what when I'm looking through these, as I said, I don't know much about them, but when I see something like that, it's like, oh, I know that, and
Yeah.
that makes it a little more fun for me, at least, to do that. Ernst Opek, an astronomer. He did a lot of research on astronomy, but he did. One of the things I remember is I believe he studied meteors or comets. I forget which one, but he predicted the craters on Mars. And it turned out decades later they did, they when they got to Mars, it was just what he said it was. But he knew through his mathematics what Mars was going to look like, and he was right.
Hmm.
Um, One of the things that I've started doing with most of our states, I try to find their first Olympian, and
Uh-huh.
I've got Estonia's. Um, Alfred Karl Newland was the first gold medal winner from Estonia. He was a wrestler. I believe it was 1920 that he won his first medal. I think
Hmm.
he was there in 24 again, if I recall.
Hmm.
So that's interesting. I like to bring in. I try to bring in some sports and entertainment. I couldn't find any deceased entertainers that were of significant notability from Estonia. That's the first time I wasn't able to do that, but I did get our sports connection there. Louis Kahn is a very famous architect. I looked at his buildings, and um, he's not my favorite architect. He has some pretty. He was very into concrete and square shapes, so he designed a lot of um, square concrete buildings, and I'm not overly impressed, but apparently, from architectural standpoint, um, he was is quite prominent.
Hmm.
He has an interesting story outside of his career. When he was 3 years old, the mom was cooking with some hot coals, and he was fascinated by them, so he picks them up. I don't know what he picked them up with, but stuck them in his apron, and they caught fire, and he was very severely burned.
Oh no.
And if you look at any of his pictures, he's got the scars were with him the rest of his life. But that was a pretty traumatic thing to have
Wow,
to go through.
that's
And
sad.
that would have been in about 1904, when they didn't have medical
Hmm.
care like they do now either. So
Yeah.
that was an interesting story.
Hmm.
Esther, and I'm going to say Magi, but I don't know again the pronunciation there. She's considered the first lady of Estonian music.
Hmm.
She was actually a classical composer, so that was not pop music.
Yeah.
She lived to be almost 100 years old, and very, again, very prominent in her country, and probably worldwide.
Hmm.
Leonard Mary. Now, we had the first president of um, Estonia. Leonard Mary was the first president after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Hmm.
So they kind of have two first presidents. And he died not too long ago, 2006. But he was actually a film director, married to a movie star, and then entered politics and wound up becoming president. And then our final two, as I mentioned, I always do the living head of state and head of government. The current president, head of state, is Alar Karis, and the current prime minister is Kaja Kallas. Karis and Kallas. So they're both currently in office. We'll see how public their records are, but again, those seem to be the most difficult ones to now. Estonia um, is one of the countries that's transitioned from communism to democracy, maybe better than a lot of countries that have struggled with. They're a fairly modernized country.
Hmm.
Haven't had quite the dramatic experience that some of the other countries have. Um, they also, one of the things that's interesting is they have one of the least religious populations in the world.
Hmm.
The vast majority of Estonians do not identify with a religion. Um, there are a number of reasons for that. Some of it comes from the Soviet era, when religion was um, not supported strongly, but
Hmm.
also they from what I've read, they tend to identify the Christian religions as symbolic of the oppressors in a sense.
I
So
see.
there's a lot of rejection
Okay.
of that. So,
Hmm.
but the population that is religious does tend to be Christian,
Mhm.
with small numbers of um, Hindus, Jews, Buddhists, etc.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was interesting that it's more than half the population does not identify with a religion,
Hmm.
and that's important for our research because that's where records are kept, is in the various churches. So knowing what religions we're going to be dealing with can help guide us.
Yeah.
So there we got it. There's
Yeah.
our 15 people.
Let's get
Um,
Estonians connected. I just put the link in the chat.
yeah, so I'm going to open this tonight. Normally we do our sessions on Monday and I open it on Tuesday. We were delayed for unforeseen circumstances this time, so we're here on a Tuesday instead of a Monday. But I'm still going to open it up on Monday, so I'll have it open very shortly. In the meantime, if you go to any of our other nations and just change the name of the nation in your address bar from India, Kenya, Cameroon, whatever, to Estonia, it'll take you to the site. But I'll have it open in just a period of time and get the G2G notice up. And I think that does it. We will see what it's like in Estonia. That's a region of the world I'm not real familiar with, so it'll be interesting.
Yeah,
Kind
David,
of
thank you so
on the cusp of the West and the East.
much. Yeah. I learned a lot. I really I didn't know much about Cameroon, so I really enjoyed hearing about the
Yeah,
discoveries.
I enjoy with each of these countries. I've learned so much. It really is like taking a tour around the world.
Hmm.
Um, the things that I've learned when you're reading about an individual's story, but in the context of the history of their country,
Hmm.
um, it really it's like reading a novel sometimes. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well,
and
uh,
you're oh, all right. Well, I don't see any questions in the chat room, so we will sign off. And as I said, I'm going to get everything opened up tonight so we can get started, and we'll see where this takes us.
awesome. Thank you to everyone who was with us in the chat and to those of you who are watching afterwards. And um, let's see what we can find out about Estonia. Right.
Yeah, and one quick things that I do want to say for people that are new, um, just drop us a note and we'll get you hooked up. You can join in at any time. Don't feel like you have to um, have any particular skills or you have to jump through any hoops to do this. Just let us know you're interested, and I'll guide you on what we need done. And we need people not just make connections, but we need bio writers and proofreaders and all kinds of other stuff. So there's lots of work for people to do on all different levels.
Yeah. One thing about
Yeah.
any WikiTree challenge that I've ever been involved with is it's very welcoming to people of all
Yeah.
levels. So don't be shy.
Yeah, we really enjoy bringing new people in. It's kind of exciting to be able to share what we do. And so yeah, don't be shy and don't be intimidated by the topic, because we're all learning it together.
Great. All right.
All right.
Well, until the
Okay.
next until the next tour. Thank you, David.
Yep. We'll be back in 3 weeks and let you know how we did with Estonia.
All right.
All right.
Bye,
Bye bye,
everyone.
everybody.